Okay, welcome to Planet Geography. Today we're dealing with the Clark-Fisher model. Here is the Clark-Fisher model. And the Clark-Fisher model is basically a timeline of development and in terms of employment in a country. Okay? Before we look at kind of how it changes and how we can answer the exam question on it, let's look at the 4 types of employment because we need to know what these are. Your first type, here is an image of it, and a definition. Pause it if you want to read the official definition. Primary employment tends to be low-skilled and low-paid work. It tends to be physically hard because it's all about resource extraction, getting raw materials from earth, from out of the ground, and turning it into profit. So, fishing and agriculture are the classic examples of this. You don't need a high level of education to do it. It's hard physical work. Mining, digging coal can also be an example of this. Yep, so the key things to take away from primary employment are it is low paid and low skilled and hard work. Your next type of employment is secondary employment. So here's a definition and an image. Pause it if you need. Secondary employment is about manufacturing. Wages slightly increase. Okay, your employment becomes slightly more formal. Maybe you start paying some taxes, but maybe you also get some sick pay and some holiday. Maybe you get 1 day a week off. So it tends to be people often move from primary employment into secondary employment. Car manufacturing or any type of manufacturing is an example of this. So be aware there is kind of low level secondary work and high level. You could be making t-shirts and flip-flops for Primark, or you can be making Mercedes cars. There is a big range in kind of how much you can get paid in it. Okay? Your next, tertiary, which means the third. Here's a definition and an image of what tertiary employment is. Tertiary employment is service-based employment. So if you're a teacher, a doctor, you work in advertisement, you work in banking, you work in insurance, all of this you're providing a service. Someone who works in insurance or in advertisement, they don't make a physical product, they provide a service. Okay, so again, the wages on average have gone up. Yep, the UK is a service-based economy. Most people watching this video, you probably see yourself working into some sort of tertiary employment, okay? So it requires a certain level of education, qualifications, literacy, numeracy to be able to do these jobs. That's why they're dominated by your kind of high-income countries. And then finally, the smallest and most niche type of employment only really comes in the post-industrial economy. So you've got to be a high-income country, MEDC, okay, if you want any type of quaternary employment. This is about research and development. So here's a picture with a definition. Quaternary employment. You're working in potentially developing new drugs. You're working on vaccines. The easiest example and the most current example would be working in AI, okay? Working in robotics, working in driverless cars, okay? So if you know anything about California and Silicon Valley, that's quaternary employment. That's why that part of the planet has the highest wages in the world. To do this, you need to be a master's student, a PhD student. You need to be a true master in your field to reach quaternary employment, okay? So, you need to know what these are, these different categories of employment, if you can have any chance of understanding the Clark-Fisher model. Primary, resource extraction. Secondary, manufacturing. Tertiary, services. Quaternary, research and development. Okay? Right, we're going to jump now into the Clark-Fisher model, and I'll see you in a second. Okay, so let's get stuck into what the Clark-Fisher model actually is. It's a line graph, essentially. So it's telling us a story. Whenever you see a line graph, you will see that time is on the bottom, on the x-axis. So that is something to bear in mind. There are 3 sections, the Clark-Fisher model. There is the industrial is in the middle. Okay, so that's when a country is industrialized. Think about the British Industrial Revolution and so on. Pre-industrial and post-industrial. So you've got your low-income country, your middle-income, and your high-income, okay? So here is your percentage of employment. So if it starts up here, well then it's at 90% employment, okay? This will be kind of your 80%, and down here will be kind of your 20% of your country working there, okay? So, let's start off with primary. Let's start off with primary employment. So I'm going to use green because it's kind of agriculture, isn't it? What we're going to see is it's very, very high. When you have that kind of, you think about your Rostow model, your traditional society, you know, you've got 95% of people working in agriculture, maybe there's one doctor in every 10,000 people. So agriculture dominates at this point. But as you move towards an industrial society, people start leaving the fields and start heading into factories. Okay, better wages, better working conditions, more structural employment. And then you get into your your kind of post-industrial. So kind of, again, the UK is a post-industrial economy. Most of our factories have closed down. This means that most of you couldn't name anybody that works in primary employment. You don't know anybody that works in a mine, any fishermen, any farmers, okay? Now that's not to say that the UK is producing less food. We are, because we're a post-industrial country, we are affluent, but we have tractors doing the work of 100 people, okay? So we are producing food, but it's being done mechanically. So primary employment just tends to come down as education improves, people want higher wages and less physically challenging work, okay? Secondary employment. Let's go with blue for secondary employment. Well, secondary employment does kind of fluctuates. You know, it comes out of nowhere. Your country's not making very many things when you're a very, very poor country. It's not producing much goods. No factories, or very little. But you start to see a boom as it industrializes, okay? Transnational companies move in, they set up factories. Labor is cheap, so they absolutely love it. Vietnam is your classic example of this. China is now moving here, and Vietnam is stepping up and replacing it. Okay, so in Vietnam, where I lived for 3 years, you know, the industrial economy is booming. Okay, economic growth tends to be very, very common here. People's wages are starting to improve, so they can afford certain luxuries, like maybe a motorbike, some sort of kind of official style accommodation with internet and electricity. But then it starts to decline because wages in the secondary sector generally don't tend to be very high. If you're making Primark t-shirts or if you're screwing iPhones together, you're not getting high wages. If I'm going to assemble an iPhone, I probably don't need to be able to read or write. So again, my skill is not so high, and therefore people that can leave this type of employment, they will. Okay? Remember, that's secondary, that's manufacturing. And so, tertiary employment. Now, tertiary employment does exist. Even in your most traditional, most basic country, there's going to be teachers, there's going to be doctors, there's going to be lawyers. There's not going to be very many, but there's going to be some. But as that education improves, it's going to start to increase. Advertisement companies are going to start being created. Banks are going to start employing more and more people. More and more people being sent to school, so teachers are going to start to improve. If I get sick, I go to hospital, okay? And then it kind of flatlines a little bit as we get into the post-industrial city, but it's still the big employer, maybe like 70% of people. So if I said to you, can you name somebody that works in the tertiary sector, like they provide a service, you could probably name in England or in the UK 20, 30, 40 people that you know. In fact, like almost everyone you know works in the tertiary sector, okay? You'd struggle to name anyone that works in a factory or works on a farm. And then that leaves us with the last category. It is still, even in a post-industrial, high-income country, quaternary employment is still very, very low, okay? Because again, you need a PhD to do this. you need years and years and years of training. And again, there's not that many jobs in it. You know, how many people work for AI in Google is, you know, it's thousands of people, but thousands of people across the millions of people that live in the country is still a very small number. So this is the kind of high-skilled, very, very highly paid work. You know, the average salary in Silicon Valley is over 100,000 US dollars. That's the average, okay? And that's because most people work in quaternary employment. And so that's it. That's the Clark-Fisher model. It is a story. It's a timeline. Okay, think about what a country's employment looks like when it is a low-income country. It is very basic. Resource extraction, farming and fishing dominate. And then here in this industrial sector, people have left the countryside, massive rural to urban migration, better jobs, better conditions, slightly more formal employment. People absolutely pile into the factories to work, because for them, you know, it's a chance for them to start a new life that isn't basic farming. And that is why you see such rapid urban growth in Asia. And then tertiary just maintains its classic growth as education becomes more and more prevalent. Your population can do more and more things as that education increases, okay? Until it is absolutely the most common form. All right, here's my doctor. Oh no, I've gone for it. Terrible idea. There's my doctor with a telescope. And then finally, the appearance of quaternary employment at the very end, because you have such established universities producing highly skilled individuals. That is the Clark-Fisher model. I tend to actually like the Clark-Fisher model. I think it really helps kids understand what's going on. But you've got to remember, this is about the types of employment and the 3 stages: pre-industrial and post-industrial. And primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary. And just remember, those words seem a little bit scary. Primary means number 1, secondary means number 2, tertiary number 3, and quaternary means 4, okay? So that's all it really means. Don't get freaked out by those words. Okay, we're gonna see if we can find an exam question on this, and we'll jump into that. If we can't find one, this is the end of the video, all right? Otherwise, I'll see you next time as we make more and more content.